The morning of December 7, 1941, began like any other in Hawaii, but by nightfall, the world had changed forever. Smoke rose in thick columns from battleships, explosions echoed across Pearl Harbor, and Americans learned, in stunned disbelief, that the Japanese Imperial Navy had launched a surprise attack on the United States. Over 2,400 servicemen and civilians were killed, nearly 20 ships were damaged or destroyed, and hundreds of planes lay in ruins on the tarmac. For decades, the United States had remained largely isolated from Europe and Asia's brewing conflicts, focusing on domestic recovery from the Great Depression. Isolationism had dominated policy debates, and public opinion had leaned against involvement in foreign wars. But in the span of a few hours, that cautious stance evaporated. The attack on Pearl Harbor became the clarion call that propelled the United States into the global conflict it had long resisted, marking the moment when a regional strike transformed into a world war. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, facing Congress the next day, described the attack as a date which will live in infamy, and the nation responded with an unprecedented surge of unity and determination. Americans from every walk of life enlisted or contributed to the war effort, factories shifted to wartime production, and a sense of purpose permeated the national consciousness. The United States, once an observer on the world stage, now assumed the role of a decisive actor, balancing the immense challenges of modern warfare with the enormous industrial capacity that would soon define its strategic advantage. Yet, entering the war was only the beginning. The true test lay in navigating the complexities of a conflict that spanned oceans, continents, and ideologies, and in forging alliances with nations whose interests were not always aligned. Early in the conflict, U.S. military planners faced difficult decisions. Europe and North Africa demanded attention as German forces occupied vast territories, while the Pacific theater burned with Japanese expansion. The debate over strategy became one of the defining discussions of the early war years. Military leaders and politicians wrestled with the question, should the United States prioritize defeating Germany in Europe first, or focus on the pressing threat posed by Japan in the Pacific? Ultimately, the Europe First strategy was adopted, reflecting the judgment that Germany posed the greater long-term danger to global stability and that defeating Hitler would pave the way for eventual victory against Japan. This decision would guide U.S. military operations, shaping deployments, resource allocation, and the timing of critical campaigns for the remainder of the war. As the United States mobilized, diplomacy became as critical as battlefield tactics. Roosevelt understood that success depended on forging and maintaining a coalition capable of defeating Axis powers. Relations with Britain, led by Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and the Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, required constant negotiation and trust building, even amid ideological differences. By 1943, Allied leaders convened the Tehran Conference, their first meeting face-to-face, to plan the next stages of the war. Roosevelt and Churchill sought to reassure Stalin of a second front in Western Europe, a promise that would materialize as Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion, while Stalin emphasized the need to secure Soviet influence in Eastern Europe. The conference demonstrated both the challenges and the importance of high-level diplomacy. Shared goals required compromise, careful persuasion, and an awareness of post-war implications, even as men and women fought and died on distant battlefields. While Allied leaders negotiated, American forces began demonstrating the effectiveness of industrial mobilization and innovation. Factories once producing consumer goods were converted into arms manufacturing centers, producing aircraft, tanks, ships, and weapons on a scale unmatched in history. Technological advancements, from radar to code breaking, gave the United States and its allies critical advantages, allowing them to anticipate enemy movements, coordinate complex operations, and strike with precision. In Europe, American soldiers trained in preparation for amphibious assaults, urban combat, and coordinated attacks alongside British and Canadian troops. The challenges were immense: harsh climates, entrenched enemy positions, and the logistical nightmare of supplying forces thousands of miles from home tested military ingenuity and perseverance. In the Pacific, the lessons were equally harsh. The Philippines fell in 1942, and the infamous Bataan Death March highlighted both Japanese ruthlessness and the extraordinary resilience of Allied troops. Naval engagements such as the Battle of Midway in June 1942 shifted momentum, showcasing the value of intelligence and aircraft carrier-based warfare. The U.S. adopted an island-hopping strategy, bypassing heavily fortified Japanese positions to capture strategically important islands, gradually closing in on Japan's home islands. Every operation demanded new tactics, courage under fire, and adaptation to environmental and cultural conditions unique to the Pacific. Disease, terrain, and isolation compounded the physical dangers of combat, proving that victory required more than firepower alone. It required endurance, coordination, and a relentless determination to succeed against a determined enemy. Domestically, the United States underwent profound social and economic transformations. Millions of men and women joined the armed forces, while those on the home front filled factories, offices, and farms, sustaining the war effort. The war accelerated movements for civil rights, particularly for African Americans and women, who sought recognition and equality through their contributions to the nation's defense. The V campaign, victory abroad against fascism and victory at home against racial injustice, highlighted the contradictions and aspirations of a nation fighting for freedom overseas while confronting inequality domestically. Simultaneously, propaganda, rationing, and patriotic campaigns mobilized public sentiment, fostering a collective commitment to the cause that stretched across cities, towns, and rural areas alike. By 1943, the United States had evolved from a reluctant participant into a central force capable of shaping the course of the war. Military successes in North Africa, strategic victories in the Pacific, and a growing capacity for coordinated Allied action reflected the country's emergence as a global power. Roosevelt's leadership, emphasizing coalition building, strategic foresight, and the integration of military and industrial resources, positioned the United States not merely as a participant but as a decisive actor in determining the outcome of World War II. The challenges remained immense, but the momentum had shifted. The Allies were no longer merely reacting to Axis initiatives, they were setting the agenda, planning operations that would liberate occupied territories, and ultimately preparing for the invasion of Europe that would turn the tide of history. The entry of the United States into World War II was more than a military decision, it represented a profound shift in national identity and global responsibility. From the ashes of Pearl Harbor to the coordinated strategies with Britain and the Soviet Union, America demonstrated the power of mobilization, innovation, and diplomacy. Every ship launched, every plane deployed, and every soldier trained reflected a nation awakening to its potential and embracing its role as a guardian of a world under siege. The story of 1941 to 1943 set the stage for the campaigns that would follow, revealing a country transformed by urgency, strategy, and the indomitable will to prevail. It was a time when decisions made in Washington, Tehran, and distant battlefields intertwined, forging a path that would lead to victory and forever alter the United States' place in the world. Forging the Second Front and the European campaigns. By early 1944, the tension in Allied headquarters was palpable. Roosevelt, Churchill, and their military advisors had spent months planning the long-awaited invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe. The promise made to Stalin at Tehran, the establishment of a second front, was about to be realized. For the American military, this was not simply another battle, it was the culmination of years of preparation, testing both the logistical might of the United States and the cohesion of the Allied coalition. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen from across the country had trained tirelessly, mastering amphibious assaults, mechanized warfare, and combined operations alongside British and Canadian troops. Every detail of Operation Overlord, later known as D-Day, required precision, coordination, and an understanding that failure could prolong the war by years. The months leading up to June 1944 were a study in patience, strategy, and deception. The Allies launched a complex misinformation campaign, convincing the Germans that the primary invasion would occur at the Pas-de-Calais region rather than Normandy. Inflatable tanks, fake radio transmissions, and false troop movements all contributed to the elaborate ruse. American soldiers, meanwhile, endured grueling exercises in southern England, learning to navigate treacherous beaches, storm coastal defenses, and adapt to the unpredictable weather of the Channel. Generals like Dwight D. Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, and George S. Patton orchestrated a delicate balance between secrecy and preparation, aware that the success of the operation rested on timing, coordination, and morale. On the morning of June 6, 1944, the invasion began. Thousands of Allied planes roared across the sky, dropping paratroopers behind enemy lines while tens of thousands of troops stormed the beaches. Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. Each beach represented a unique challenge, with cliffs, mines, barbed wire, and entrenched German forces awaiting the assault. The fighting was brutal, the sea itself seemed to resist the landings, waves tossing landing crafts and men alike. Casualties mounted, yet the relentless determination of the soldiers carried them forward. The success of D-Day was not guaranteed by strategy alone, it was achieved through courage, improvisation, and sheer human will in the face of overwhelming danger. As the beachheads were secured, the Allies pressed inland, facing fierce German resistance. Towns and villages became battlegrounds, with street-to-street fighting and booby-trap defenses testing every ounce of training and resilience. American divisions advanced alongside British and Canadian units, highlighting the necessity of international cooperation. Logistics played an equally critical role, supply lines had to be maintained across storm-tossed seas, while air support had to anticipate German counterattacks. Every tank destroyed, every bridge captured, and every radio message transmitted represented a coordinated effort of unprecedented scale. By July, the Allies had established a foothold strong enough to begin a full-scale push into France, signaling that the war in Western Europe was entering its decisive phase. While the ground war raged, the skies above Europe became a theater of relentless air campaigns. American bombers targeted factories, railways, and communication centers deep within German territory, aiming to cripple industrial capacity and erode morale. The technological and logistical achievements of the U.S. military allowed for sustained bombing raids, with fighter escorts ensuring that American crews could reach their targets despite fierce Luftwaffe opposition. Civilian populations endured the consequences, with cities reduced to rubble and countless lives lost. The ethical dilemmas of strategic bombing weighed heavily on commanders and policymakers alike, yet the relentless air campaigns contributed directly to weakening Germany's ability to resist the advancing Allied armies. The liberation of Paris in August 1944 marked a symbolic and strategic victory. After 4 years under Nazi occupation, the French capital was finally free, and the morale boost for both soldiers and civilians was immense. American forces, pushing eastward, encountered increasingly desperate resistance as the German military, though battered, continued to employ defensive strategies and counterattacks. Battles in regions like Lorraine and the Ardennes demonstrated that victory would not come quickly or without sacrifice. The Allies relied on combined arms operations, integrating artillery, tanks, infantry, and air support in coordinated assaults that maximized their growing technological and numerical superiority. Amid the military operations, diplomacy continued to shape the larger picture. Roosevelt maintained communication with Churchill and Stalin, balancing the need for strategic unity with the competing ambitions of each ally. Stalin pressed for continued pressure on the Eastern Front to ensure that the Red Army could advance into Eastern Europe, a campaign critical for securing Soviet influence post-war. Roosevelt's skillful mediation ensured that these pressures did not fracture the coalition, demonstrating that leadership in wartime demanded both strategic vision and political acumen. Decisions made in London, Washington, and Moscow directly influenced the timing, scale, and direction of operations across the European continent. By late 1944, the Allies faced one of their greatest challenges, the German counteroffensive in the Ardennes, later known as the Battle of the Bulge. Snow, fog, and surprise attacks tested the resilience of American and Allied forces, slowing their advance and inflicting significant casualties. Yet, the ability of U.S. divisions to hold defensive positions, regroup, and coordinate reinforcements ultimately blunted the German offensive. The battle underscored the evolving skill of American commanders and troops, who had matured from inexperienced soldiers into battle-hardened units capable of responding to even the most challenging scenarios. Each victory, costly as it was, pushed the Allies closer to Germany's borders and the ultimate goal of unconditional surrender. The campaigns of 1944 also highlighted the integration of new technologies and intelligence capabilities. Code-breaking efforts allowed the Allies to anticipate German movements, while innovations in logistics ensured that fuel, ammunition, and food reached forward positions efficiently. Amphibious vehicles, mechanized infantry, and long-range artillery enhanced mobility and firepower, giving U.S. forces an advantage in both offense and defense. The combination of human courage, industrial capacity, and technological innovation became the defining feature of the American approach to warfare in Europe, illustrating how a nation's organizational power could be leveraged alongside bravery and tactical skill to achieve monumental objectives. As 1944 drew to a close, the Allies had successfully liberated much of Western Europe, but the war was far from over. German forces remained entrenched in key positions, and the push into the heart of Germany would demand further planning, coordination, and sacrifice. Yet the lessons of the past year were clear: unity among allies, meticulous planning, and the willingness to adapt to unexpected circumstances could overcome even the most formidable opponent. The United States had transformed from a nation shocked into action at Pearl Harbor into a dominant force capable of shaping the course of a global conflict. Its soldiers, strategies, and innovations were now central to the fate of Europe, and the foundation had been laid for the final campaigns that would ultimately end the war in the West. The European campaigns of 1944 demonstrated that modern warfare was as much a test of planning, diplomacy, and coordination as it was of courage on the battlefield. From the beaches of Normandy to the snowy forests of the Ardennes, American forces proved capable of integrating industrial power, technological innovation, and coalition strategy into a coherent and effective military effort. Leaders like Roosevelt and Eisenhower understood that the war's outcome depended on the synchronization of these elements across continents, oceans, and climates. The victories in France and the resilience shown against counterattacks signaled that the tide of war had irrevocably turned in favor of the Allies, setting the stage for the push into Germany and the eventual liberation of a continent under tyranny. Island hopping and the Pacific struggle. The vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean became the ultimate proving ground for the United States during World War II. Unlike Europe, where battles were fought across cities and farmland, the Pacific demanded a unique approach: thousands of miles of open water, hundreds of islands, and an enemy fiercely entrenched in every corner of their occupied territory. From the outset, American military leaders recognized that a direct assault on Japan was impossible without first securing key positions across the Pacific. The strategy of island hopping emerged, a bold plan that focused on capturing strategically vital islands while bypassing others, isolating Japanese strongholds, and steadily advancing toward the home islands. Each step was meticulously calculated, blending naval supremacy, air power, and amphibious assaults in a coordinated effort that tested the limits of human endurance and military ingenuity. The early months of 1942 had been sobering for American forces. After the fall of the Philippines and the harrowing Bataan Death March, the United States faced the daunting reality of Japanese expansion. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor had crippled much of the Pacific Fleet, and key territories, from Guam to Wake Island, had fallen under Japanese control. Yet American leaders refused to succumb to despair. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz and General Douglas MacArthur, among others, began orchestrating counteroffensives, recognizing that the combination of naval power, aircraft carriers, and intelligence could turn the tide. The Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942 marked the first significant halt to Japanese advancement, demonstrating the strategic importance of aircraft carriers and signaling a shift toward modern naval warfare. The turning point came with the Battle of Midway in June 1942. Using intelligence from broken Japanese codes, U.S. forces anticipated the Japanese attack and prepared an ambush. The result was decisive: Japan lost 4 carriers, a blow from which it would never fully recover. Midway showcased the emerging strength of American naval and air power and the value of intelligence in modern warfare. It also boosted morale, proving that despite earlier setbacks, the United States could take the initiative in the Pacific and dictate the pace of the conflict. From this point forward, American forces moved from defensive operations to sustained offensives, executing a campaign that would combine precision, adaptability, and relentless determination. The island hopping strategy required extraordinary coordination. Amphibious assaults, often launched under heavy fire, demanded meticulous planning and logistical support. Troops, tanks, and supplies had to be transported across hundreds of miles of open water, while artillery and aircraft provided cover against entrenched Japanese defenders. At each island, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, and Iwo Jima, American soldiers faced extreme challenges: rugged terrain, intense heat, dense jungles, and well-fortified enemy positions. The Japanese employed tunnels, bunkers, and kamikaze tactics, making every advance costly. Casualties mounted, and the psychological toll on soldiers was immense. Yet each victory brought the United States closer to Japan's doorstep, demonstrating a combination of perseverance, planning, and technological innovation that became a hallmark of the Pacific Campaign. Logistics became a crucial element of success. Floating hospitals, portable airfields, and supply chains spanning thousands of miles allowed troops to fight effectively in isolated locations. Aircraft provided reconnaissance, close air support, and bombardment, while naval vessels protected convoys from enemy submarines and surface attacks. Intelligence efforts, including code breaking and reconnaissance missions, helped anticipate Japanese movements and minimize surprises. Coordination among Army, Navy, and Marine units, often operating in harsh and unpredictable conditions, reflected the growing sophistication of American military operations. Each engagement reinforced lessons learned from previous battles, refining tactics, improving efficiency, and saving countless lives in subsequent campaigns. The human cost of the Pacific War was staggering. The capture of Iwo Jima in early 1945 exemplified both the courage and suffering of American troops. Japanese defenders, deeply committed to a no-surrender code, transformed the island into a fortress. The Marines faced relentless gunfire, artillery, and hidden tunnels, yet advanced inch by inch, driven by determination and a sense of purpose. The iconic flag raising on Mount Suribachi symbolized not only a tactical victory but also the resilience, sacrifice, and heroism of every soldier involved. Similarly, battles on islands like Okinawa tested the limits of endurance, with high casualties, kamikaze attacks, and civilian suffering highlighting the brutal nature of the Pacific theater. As the island-hopping campaign progressed, the United States prepared for the final phase, bringing the war directly to Japan. Strategic bombing campaigns, enabled by long-range aircraft, targeted industrial centers, military installations, and transportation networks, weakening Japan's capacity to sustain the war. Innovations such as the B-29 Superfortress allowed American forces to strike deep into the Japanese homeland, complementing the gains made through amphibious assaults and naval dominance. Simultaneously, planners considered the human and logistical challenges of a potential invasion of Japan itself, weighing the expected casualties against the urgency of ending the conflict swiftly. The campaign in the Pacific also revealed the broader social and political dimensions of American involvement. Soldiers and sailors were often stationed thousands of miles from home, relying on ingenuity, camaraderie, and resilience to survive. The military's successes were intertwined with the industrial might of the United States, as factories produced ships, planes, and ammunition at a scale unparalleled in history. The home front supported the war effort through rationing, war bonds, and labor, demonstrating a national commitment that complemented frontline bravery. Women and minorities increasingly contributed to production, logistics, and support roles, reflecting the transformative impact of total war on American society and setting the stage for post-war social change. By mid-1945, the Pacific Campaign had brought American forces to Japan's doorstep, with the capture of key islands providing bases for further operations and air attacks. The combination of naval supremacy, amphibious expertise, and technological innovation had systematically dismantled Japanese defenses, while strategic planning ensured that each victory contributed to the broader objective of ending the war. Yet the cost in lives, both military and civilian, underscored the devastating nature of modern warfare and the profound responsibility borne by those directing the campaign from Washington, Pearl Harbor, and forward bases across the Pacific. The story of the Pacific Theater illustrates the evolution of the United States from a nation reacting to attack to one shaping global outcomes through strategy, industrial capacity, and innovation. From the desperate days following Pearl Harbor to the capture of islands that would bring the war within striking distance of Japan, American forces demonstrated adaptability, courage, and ingenuity. Leadership at every level, from generals and admirals to individual soldiers, combined with coordination across services and allies, created a military machine capable of sustaining long, complex campaigns across vast distances. The lessons learned in the Pacific about logistics, amphibious warfare, intelligence, and combined operations would influence both the closing stages of World War II and the future of American military doctrine. As the Pacific Campaign approached its climactic moments, the stage was set for the final confrontation with Japan. Every island seized, every enemy position neutralized, and every technological innovation implemented brought the United States closer to ending a conflict that had spanned the globe. The campaign revealed the extraordinary capacity of a nation mobilized for total war and the profound sacrifices required to achieve victory. It was a story of courage, strategy, and resilience, a testament to the men and women who transformed adversity into triumph, and a prelude to the decisive actions that would ultimately bring World War II to a close in the Pacific and cement the United States' role as a preeminent global power. The final blow and the end of global conflict. By the spring of 1945, the world teetered on the edge of a new era. In Europe, Nazi Germany was crumbling under relentless Allied pressure, while across the Pacific, Japan faced the cumulative weight of an unforgiving military campaign. The United States, having demonstrated its industrial might, strategic ingenuity, and military courage, was now positioned to deliver the final blows that would end a war spanning continents and oceans. Yet even as victory loomed, leaders grappled with profound moral and political dilemmas, understanding that the choices made in these months would resonate for decades to come. The path to ending the conflict demanded a blend of strategy, diplomacy, and unprecedented technological power, all wielded under the scrutiny of a weary global population desperate for peace. In Europe, the final months of fighting tested the resolve of both soldiers and civilians. American forces, alongside British and Soviet allies, pressed into the heart of Germany, confronting entrenched defenses, scorched cities, and a military apparatus stretched to its limits. The fall of Berlin, achieved by the Red Army in May 1945, symbolized the collapse of Hitler's regime, but it also underscored the staggering human cost of the European war. Millions of soldiers and civilians had perished, cities were reduced to rubble, and societies were left grappling with the psychological and physical scars of prolonged conflict. American diplomacy, particularly Roosevelt's vision of a post-war coalition, had set the stage for a coordinated effort to stabilize Europe, though the growing divide between Western powers and the Soviet Union foreshadowed tensions that would shape the Cold War. Meanwhile, the Pacific theater demanded a different set of strategies. The island-hopping campaign had brought the United States within striking distance of Japan, but military planners recognized that a direct invasion of the home islands would result in catastrophic casualties on both sides. Estimates projected hundreds of thousands of Allied and Japanese deaths in a protracted battle for territory densely populated with civilians. Faced with these realities, President Harry S. Truman, who assumed the presidency following Roosevelt's death in April 1945, was presented with a stark choice: continue a conventional invasion or employ a revolutionary weapon that could compel Japan to surrender swiftly. The decision would hinge on a combination of military necessity, political calculation, and the desire to end the war with minimal further loss of American lives. The introduction of the atomic bomb represented both a technological triumph and an ethical dilemma. Developed under the top-secret Manhattan Project, the bomb harnessed unprecedented destructive power, capable of leveling entire cities within moments. Military leaders and scientists debated its use, balancing the goal of ending the war against the moral implications of mass civilian casualties. Ultimately, Truman authorized its deployment, believing that a dramatic demonstration of power would force Japan to surrender unconditionally, thereby avoiding a drawn-out and bloody invasion. On August 6, 1945, the city of Hiroshima was devastated by the first atomic bomb, followed 3 days later by the bombing of Nagasaki. The sheer scale of destruction, combined with the psychological shock, compelled Japanese leaders to reconsider their position and open the path to surrender. The decision to use atomic weapons was not made in isolation. American planners weighed intelligence reports, projected casualties, and the broader geopolitical context. The Soviet Union, having declared war on Japan in August 1945, advanced rapidly through Manchuria, capturing territory that had been under Japanese control for decades. The timing of the bombings, alongside Soviet military pressure, ensured that Japan's surrender would not be influenced solely by external threats but by the recognition that continued resistance was futile. The convergence of military strategy, scientific innovation, and diplomatic calculation ultimately brought about the conclusion of the Pacific War, illustrating the complex interplay of technology and policy in modern conflict. Japan formally surrendered on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri, marking the official end of World War II. The ceremony represented not just a military victory but a profound moment of global transition. Allied powers faced the challenge of reconstruction, occupation, and reconciliation, while the United States emerged as a dominant global actor with unparalleled military and technological capabilities. The occupation of Japan, led by General Douglas MacArthur, focused on demilitarization, democratization, and economic recovery, setting the foundation for a nation that would transform from a militaristic empire into a peaceful and prosperous state. Lessons learned from the occupation would influence U.S. foreign policy for decades, emphasizing both the responsibilities and influence of a superpower in shaping post-war order. The aftermath of the war demanded unprecedented diplomatic coordination. Conferences such as Yalta and Potsdam had already established preliminary agreements regarding the division of Europe, the establishment of the United Nations, and the prosecution of war crimes. American leadership was central to these efforts, balancing commitments to allies, the principles of democracy, and the need to contain emerging threats. The Nuremberg trials, for example, set a new standard for accountability, prosecuting Nazi leaders for crimes against humanity and establishing the principle that individuals, not just states, could be held responsible under international law. Similarly, in Japan, military leaders faced tribunals that addressed atrocities committed during the war, reinforcing the global commitment to justice and human rights. World War II reshaped American society in profound ways. The war effort mobilized millions of men and women, accelerating social change, expanding industrial capacity, and fostering technological innovation. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, minorities gained new opportunities, and scientific advancements from radar to nuclear technology transformed both military and civilian life. The experience of total war underscored the interconnectedness of military, industrial, and societal power, demonstrating that victory required not just bravery on the battlefield but coordinated effort across every sector of society. These lessons would influence both domestic policy and global strategy in the decades that followed. The war also marked the beginning of a new geopolitical era. The devastation of Europe and Asia created a vacuum of power, one that the United States and the Soviet Union quickly moved to fill. While alliances forged during the conflict had achieved their immediate goals, ideological differences and competing visions for post-war governance began to surface, laying the groundwork for the Cold War. American policymakers recognized that sustaining peace would require both military preparedness and diplomatic engagement, a balance that would define foreign policy for the remainder of the 20th century. The lessons of World War II, from coalition building to technological innovation, informed strategies that shaped global politics for decades. The legacy of the war extended beyond politics and strategy. The human cost: tens of millions dead, cities destroyed, and societies disrupted left an indelible mark on global consciousness. Survivors, veterans, and civilians carried the memories of unprecedented suffering and sacrifice, shaping national narratives, collective memory, and cultural expression. Memorials, literature, and historical study ensured that the lessons of the conflict would be preserved, providing future generations with insight into both the horrors of war and the resilience of humanity in the face of adversity. As the world emerged from the shadows of total war, the United States stood at a pivotal moment. The combination of military success, technological innovation, and moral responsibility positioned the nation as a leader in global affairs. The experiences of the European and Pacific theaters had forged not only a victorious military force but a nation capable of projecting power, shaping alliances, and influencing the post-war order. The end of World War II marked the conclusion of a global conflict but also the beginning of a new chapter in international relations, one defined by reconstruction, cooperation, and the enduring challenge of preserving peace in a world that had witnessed the full potential of human destruction. The final chapter of the war, encompassing the surrender of Japan, the use of atomic weapons, and the dawn of the post-war era, highlights the extraordinary scope and consequences of global conflict. From the beaches of Normandy to the islands of the Pacific and the ruins of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, American forces played a decisive role in shaping history. Their actions, combined with the industrial, scientific, and diplomatic resources of the nation, demonstrated the capacity of a country to influence events on a global scale. World War II ended with both triumph and tragedy, victory and reflection, leaving a world forever transformed and a United States positioned at the forefront of the emerging international order.